and I shut the video off because I wasn't comfortable with the way that I was explaining things, and I want to do it in a more simplified manner. So basically, what I was saying in my previous video, um, you buy the solar system, maybe you're building one, and you get the question, you know, what will that run for how long? It's not an easy question because it all depends, but you don't want to hear it depends because it depends doesn't answer your question. So basically, I'm here to just to simplify this. Now, you can't get away from the fact that you do have to do some math with this, which I'm going to simplify really easily because even I had a lot of trouble, understanding this whole thing. But let me explain this. Okay, so you don't know nothing about solar, and you bought a little solar system, you bought a little battery and a solar panel, and you want to know how long, your fan will run. Okay, so first thing you got to do is this. All right, you have to learn this equation: volts times the amps equals the watts. All right, so you buy a battery, and that battery, it happens to be a 12-volt battery. Okay, that 12-volt battery that you bought has 100 amp hours. It means that that battery can put out 100 amps, all right, um, in an hour, or it can put out 1 amp for 100 hours, theoretically. Now, if it's a lead acid battery, you have the issue that these batteries, especially lead acid and the AGMs, okay, excluding the lithium, I'm not talking about lithium batteries, you don't want to use them more than half, okay? So if you have a 100 amp hour battery, you know that you want to use only 50% of that, okay, which is half. So in lead acid battery terms, a 100 amp hour battery is actually a 50 amp hour battery. Okay, so you have a fan like that one. All right, that fan is one that I use here in my house. It pulls on low 120 watts. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just gonna say that that fan pulls 100 watts. Okay, so I got a little picture of a fan. All right, 100 watts. Okay, so watts. The watts up there is 100 for the fan. And we know that the battery is a 12-volt battery, so this number is a 12. And then we have the amps. Okay? Now, this is the solution to that. Okay, so we have 100, which is the fan. We divide it by 12, and it will give us 8.33 amps. Okay? 8.33 amps. Okay? So I'm using that formula. Volts times amps equals watts. And right here we have the volts divided by the watts divided by the volts will give you the amps. Amps times the volts will give you the watts. Okay? Now, what happens is that our battery, going back to here, what did we say? We can only use it to half. Okay, so we won't damage the battery. So we take the 50 amps or amp hours of the battery, we divide that by the 8.33, which is the amps that the fan draws every hour, and we get 6.0024, which is the amount of hours that theoretically that battery should be able to run that fan. Now, so basically, a 100 amp hour battery, which can only be used to 50%, okay, will run a 100 watt fan for 6 hours. Now, that happens in the perfect world, okay, happens in a perfect world. The reality is that that 100 amp hour battery will probably run that fan 3.5 to 4 hours, because you have to hook it up to an inverter, because a fan like that is a regular house fan, 120 volts. And in order to take your battery 12 volts and step it up to 120 volts, you need an inverter, okay? And the inverter, which is this machine right here, if you don't know, the inverter, what it does is it inverts the 12 volts into 120 volts of household voltage, okay? So that's how that works. Now, because of the fact that you are converting or inverting those voltages to us and stepping it up higher, that whole process and heat, and you have losses, so you actually get less of a runtime. Okay. Now, what happens is that particular fan, which is 100 watts, will run that fan for 4 hours, 4 to 6 hours, but real terms, 4 hours. But what happens is, if instead of running that fan, take the same battery, the same inverter, and you put let's say a TV that uses 50 watts, so then you do the math again, and you'll notice, hold up, the TV with the same system can run 8 to 10 hours, but if I use that big fan, it'll run 4 hours. So that's where the whole depends comes in. It depends. Now, there are other terms in like electricity. There's something called Puchert's law, and I mean, I don't want to like get into the exact thing, but basically Puchert's law is saying that the more energy you're pulling from the battery, you're actually gonna get even a lesser run time. You know what I mean? So, but I mean, I don't want to confuse you guys. The whole point is this: volts multiplied by the amps will give you the watts. All right? The volts is the battery, 12 volts. The fan is the watts, 100 watts. So if we're looking at this diagram right there, since the watts are over here, you see, volts and amps is multiplication. But if you have the watts, you're not going to multiply, you're actually going to divide. So you'll divide the watts by the amps, it will give you the volts. Or if you divide the watts by the volts, it will give you the amps. Okay? Which is what I did here. Okay? So 100 watts, which is the fan, divided by 12, which are the volts of the battery, will give you 8.33 amps. Then you take the battery, which is 100 amps. You can only use half of it. So you take the 50 and you divide those 50 amps by the 8.33 amps that your fan is going to pull every hour, and it'll give you 6 hours runtime of your battery, per fan. Like I said, theoretically, mathematically, it's supposed to run 6 hours, to until 50%. Now, if you have an older battery, it probably won't hold up as much. If there are many variables. If the battery didn't get a really, really good saturated charge, you'll get even less. You might get 2 hours of runtime. So, but basically, the equation is like the most important thing. Volts times the amps equals the watts. So if whatever solar system you buy, whatever it is, if you want to know what it will run or how long it will run it, then that's the equation. Volts times the amps equals the watts. If you have the watts and you know the voltage, then you divide that by the voltage and it'll give you the amps. Okay. I had trouble understanding this, and it is a little bit confusing sometimes, but the question of how long will something run, or people say, oh, you have a solar system. Oh, well, what will that run? I mean, there really isn't a definite answer. So when you call a company to build your solar system, that company is going to build your solar system based on what you are going to run. So your neighbor's solar system might be a lot bigger than yours because he's going to run bigger things. Your other neighbor might have a solar system which is a lot smaller because they may have, gotten their system sized, and based on what they're going to run, then they don't need such a big system, so that's how it works. If you have any questions, feel free to hit me online, here on YouTube, and I'll be more than glad to explain this. And that's basically it. So just always remember, volts times the amps equals the watts. So if you buy, let's say, two batteries and you hook them up together, one of the batteries was 100 amp hours, the other one is another 100 amp hours, you have 200 amp hours. So now, if your fan ran 6 hours, now that same fan can run 12. And if you add another battery, then you add another 6 hours to that. And that's how you go building up a battery bank. You add one more battery and one more battery and one more battery until you have a whole bunch of batteries connected, which turns it into just one big battery. So you add up the amp hours. That's only if the batteries are in parallel. Okay? Now, that's another video. I'm not gonna complicate you guys with that. But so that's how it works, guys. I hope this simplifies things. I hope this kind of points people in the right direction. So when you have that doubt, hey, maybe that's all you want to run, or maybe you want to run TV. You figure, damn, I'm in my RV, and really the only thing I would like to run once in a while is a TV. Okay, then look at the TV, what you have. You check the watts. If you have a 12-volt battery, then you just do the math. Do the math. Volts times amps equals the watts, and you'll have a rough estimate of how long your appliance will run with that particular battery. Now, talking real world, if you have a 100 amp hour battery and the math works out to 6 hours, don't believe that. That's in a perfect world. All right? It might give you the 6 hours, it might not. It depends on the battery, it depends on how new the battery is, how good of a charge you got. But, if it says 6 hours, I would say I'll give you about 3.5, 4 hours worth, just to be on the safe side, and it's actually better to think that it can't give you the 6 hours, because like that, your battery won't suffer that much if you, turn off the load, a little sooner. That'll actually help. So that's it. I guess that's pretty much it. So if you have any questions or anything, feel free to write down below, and I'll get to your questions. Take care, guys. I hope this video is helpful.